Thank you. Well, welcome everybody to this session. My name is Cecilia Harvey, and I am founder and director of Cultural Nexus, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy. I specialize in cross-cultural communication. So I work across 3 languages currently, next year, hopefully 4. So I work in Italian, English, and French. And I am also a certified facilitator in cultural intelligence. I think it's a concept that people often misunderstand as in terms of how broad it is and how wide it is. And I really value difference in the job that I do. And so I'm really delighted to be here with you this evening. And thank you so much for joining and making the time outside of your working day. Nothing that we're going to talk about here is about sort of who you are, but it's understanding very much about how things often work in the UK and in the cultural context of UK workplace culture. Um, and hopefully you'll leave with a bit more knowledge, a bit more understanding, and hopefully more confidence as well as to how to navigate this. And at the end, as Koteba said, I'm more than happy to take any questions that you might have. So firstly, I let me just click that so that goes away. I think it's really important to talk about diversity. So when I talk about being diverse, it's under the multiple aspects that this can be. But I always say to people that I know or encounter, or my clients or colleagues, that it starts with respectful curiosity. So you might, need to think about this when you're communicating, but also when people communicate to you. I think questions around difference are always welcomed if they're asked in a respectful way, and if people are genuinely curious to learn and to know about difference and to expand their knowledge. And today it's not about sort of right or wrong cultures or good or bad. It's literally about understanding different signals and understanding different ways of communicating and different terms of expression. And we'll go through this in more detail, but the English language is a very ambiguous one. Some of you might already find that's the case. We're not very direct compared to other cultures. I used to work for a Dutch company, and my Dutch colleagues always used to say, I'm not going to say this in a very Dutch way, which was obviously very, very sort of direct compared to the English way. So I think it's today's session is really to help you understand how many different layers there are in terms of cultures, and how many are in the UK workplace landscape, and how you can hopefully navigate them better. And I guess to start us off, I'd really like, and I'd be delighted if you felt comfortable to unmute yourself and answer the question, but if not, you can put it in the chat. And don't worry if you don't feel comfortable at all. But I'm really curious to know about one workplace habit or one sort of workplace culture habit from your home country that you might feel is misunderstood in the UK. Because I'm sure that there are so many cross-culturally that you think, gosh, in my home country, if I went to work and I said this or behaved like this, it would be totally fine. Whereas here you might be reluctant or might think that it wouldn't be as accepted or tolerated or understood. I think that the whole point here is to gain mutual understanding of different cultures, and how to be in them. So please do pop it in the chat if you're able to and feel comfortable to. But I would love to for you to unmute and share with the group of anything that you might feel that in your home country is totally fine and cool, and here is not. Is anyone brave enough? Oh, Orlina, am I saying this correctly? Orlina. We can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Yes, hello.
Yes, yes, now yes.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I was curious to know if there is anything in the workplace culture in your sort of home country that is or a habit and that you think might not be understood here in the UK.
Uh, I don't know how to answer. Sorry.
No problem, no problem.
Uh,
Would
So
anyone else?
we have some on the chat.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah. So from Valentina, in Ukraine, more straightforward. We have another one, I think from Sarah. I think in the UK, we don't always say what we actually want, but we say maybe or perhaps when we really mean, can you do this? And also we have from Tatiana, in my country, people are more direct and show their emotions. Hannah, no means no, and in the UK, maybe means no. I don't.
It's very true. I think Christina was about to say something.
And also no small talks. That from Olena.
Ah, yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I'm from Ukraine, and also, like, I would like to summarize. Yeah, in Ukraine, we are more direct. We show our emotions, and our language also, like, we build a sentence in different ways. And for me, for example, when what I struggle in the office here, that I need to rewrite it completely, all the emails, all the sentences, because in different way, just be more polite, more like uh, to hide what I want to say, and yeah, just in different way. And a lot of people say that we are more like sometimes like angry, or because we use more direct and strong words, and also you can see our emotions on our face. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I can relate to that. My father was Italian and I grew up in Italy. And Italians are also very direct and they wear their emotions on their sleeve. But I also remember the first time I met my husband, who wasn't my husband at the time and is now my husband, but he was very confused about the tone in the phone calls that I had with my friends and family back. He always thought that I was argumentative, but we were not arguing. We were just talking sort of very, passionately and loud. So there are so many, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences. But there are so many uh, intricacies and things to understand about different cultures and communication is can be a huge a barrier. So I think when we try and navigate areas that we're not familiar with, it's really important to be aware of our own and to also be aware of the culture that we're in. But yes, thank you so much for sharing. Um, I'm
And
afraid, sorry.
I can share other example. I can share other example when we
Yes, please
just
do.
arrived. When we just arrived in England, and people ask, how are you?" Like ordinary questions, and we always try to explain really our feeling. But this was unnecessary, really. Just we should answer, "I'm fine, I'm okay," and something like this. But in our country, we really can explain our feelings that I have some problem. I really like have some issue with something, but not in the UK.
Right. Sorry, and what's your country of origin?
Ukraine.
Okay. It's interesting. I mean, I think that so on this slide, one of the first things that I sort of consider, and I think that we maybe make a mistake in, is we think that culture is often just attributed to geography or a region, but culture is much more intricate than that. And if we're talking about the workplace, industries have cultures, teams have different cultures. So you are part of a geographical culture, obviously, and you bring your own, but you are also part of a industry culture and potentially a team culture. The sort of finance team does not speak the same language as the sales team, and they communicate very differently. Their culture might be different. And I think also in your hobbies, if you are, or whatever you do outside of work, there might be a culture there. If you play a sport, there's a particular culture. And so I think there are so many elements to a culture, and we bring all of that experience to work. All of us and our cultural understanding and our cultural lived experience come to us. So for me, and I really like this definition because I think it encompasses that very nicely. So culture refers to the shared values, beliefs, norms, behaviors, customs, and practices of a particular group of people. It encompasses the language, arts, laws, social structures, traditions, and symbols that characterize a particular group of or society. And I think it really does influence how we interpret the world. And I think here that's the challenging thing. Our culture defines us, and we use that lens, from our culture to interpret other cultures. And I think sometimes that's where we can trip up because we need to try and understand the other lens, or rather the two lenses in an ideal world need to be a little bit fused and mixed in order for mutual understanding to happen. But I think the most essential part for me is about identity. I think culture really shapes who you are. And I think it's also fluid. I'm 50, and when I was 20, the things that I accepted as cultural norms or elements that I particularly liked are very different to now. Not just in the workplace, but in values. If we look at the first part of the definition, it's about values and beliefs and norms, and that evolves in time with us as we grow older and more experienced. So I think as a concept, it's a very intricate one, and there are lots of examples, and we'll go through a few. But I think some were mentioned earlier. But if I think of a typical example is, on time, being on time in a particular culture is very different to another culture. In Italy, you're on time if you are, even an hour late, you're still on time. In Britain, people arrive early, always, and that's the sort of norm, or very rarely are they late. And even if it's 5 minutes late, we tend to apologize for about half an hour. We're so sorry, we're really late. We're so sorry, I'm so sorry, we're late. But, Italians, if you're past the hour mark, you might turn up and say, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I was, in traffic or whatever. But I think it's more, so there's a fluidity around certain concepts, and time is certainly one of them. But I think in the UK, punctuality is considered, really, really important, in the workplace or meetings when you meet people. Kateba or Sarah, do let me know if there are sort of any elements in the chat. I'm more than happy to take them, if they refer to a particular slide, so that we don't lose what the comment is. So do feel free to interrupt me. So some of the common challenges you might face, I was considering this and I was thinking what these might be. And I think, understanding indirect communication is probably one of the biggest challenges, because language that is very polite but ambiguous and feels unclear and is not, that what you're used to in your country. So several of you have mentioned directness, or several of you have mentioned that if you're asked a question, the people will get the answer that they've asked, whereas here in the UK, it can feel very grey. The area can feel very grey a lot of the time. And maybe a lack of access to sort of networks or mentors or wider groups of people that are really essential, that are from the UK, to help you understand, what the job market looks like, but also what the experiences of that they have of also working cross-culturally, I think is really important. It helps everybody learn. And maybe you might have difficulty proving your skills or qualifications, mainly because of translation. An example is in Italy, most degree courses are 5 years. Here in the UK, lots of them are 3, for example, or how long you go to school for, or what years you go to school in. Sometimes there isn't a direct correlation or translation, so that might be a challenge if you have a CV, for example, and it reflects something, and it's a different norm or it's a different timeline to what the UK is used to. So some of maybe you might have experienced that type of a challenge. And I think for some cultures, there might be a hesitation to self-promote. I think if you're in an unfamiliar system, depending on what your culture is, and I have friends who are from Asian-speaking countries, and they do not like culturally to put themselves forward, to put their hand up, to interrupt, to intervene, to make a comment, and certainly not to self-promote. So I think different cultures feel very differently about that. But I think when you're navigating the job market, or you see an opportunity, or you want to go for a promotion, or you want to start a business, sometimes cross-culturally it might be very difficult, especially if English is not your first language, to say, these are my skills, I'm very good at this, and I'm confident that I can do this role or this job, or I can open this business and it will be successful, whatever the situation may be. And I also think emotional and cultural fatigue, and this is something that in my work I encounter a lot when I work with people who are from other countries and work cross-culturally, is when you are resettling. So when you've moved from your home country, and maybe you've moved to other countries in between, and the UK is your landing point, you are constantly learning about new norms, new ways of expression, new things that are acceptable or not acceptable here. You are constantly in this sort of interpreting sort of landscape, which is really sort of I feel it drains you. It's very challenging, I think, mentally and emotionally, to keep thinking, okay, so I shouldn't say this, or if I say this, this will be interpreted in a certain way, or I've said this and maybe I was too direct. Should I now then go and explain myself that I didn't mean it? Or did that person think I'm rude? All of that is processing of data, of constant processing of data, which can feel exhausting. But I wanted to sort of put these up, and please feel free if you think that one in particular. Yes, Sarah, sorry.
There are a few comments that are related to this slide, Cecilia.
Yeah.
And interesting for me too, because obviously at Brighton Chamber, I am also an employer as well as an employee. So there are some comments about, somebody says that in the UK there's not much, or maybe it's in their country, no small talk, and it is weird to soften everything to the, I think it means to the point of pointlessness. Someone else says your boss can criticize you directly in Ukraine, sometimes too harsh, which is really discouraging. Here I notice that people don't behave like this. If you're not doing well, you'll never be told it so bluntly. So it's kind of good things and bad things, isn't it? Someone else says subcultural slang and habits. And somebody else says, is it common to self-promote yourself in the UK?
That's a good question. I would say it depends. So again, I'm going to be it shouldn't be ambiguous, but I would say it depends, and I think it depends on your level of seniority. It can often depend on your gender, and it can depend on your racial background. So I think there are elements in which people are more comfortable to self-promote, but I think as a culture, my answer would be that people tend not to. I don't know what your experience is, Sarah, but I genuinely think that in general, we don't like to self-promote because it's seen as, boasting, or it can be seen as being big-headed or arrogant, etc. But I caveat that with it also depends, on what your yes, Sarah.
I think your what you said earlier about it really does depend on what sector you're in. If you're in finance or if you're in childcare. But one of the things we've had a fairly new employee recently, and one of the things that they do, which I think is very good, is they will listen and learn, but they'll also say, would you like me to do that? Or I could do that. So it's a way of showing that they are, competent and able to do something, but it's in a very kind of supportive way, which suits our organization very well. But I think there might be other organizations where you might get a bit lost if you don't say, I could do that, or I've done that before. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think a sort of a common challenge is sort of, I guess, seniority. So a sort of power dynamic. If you're new into a company, you might feel less confident to do that if you've been there a little while, or if you have already colleagues and peers or a boss who seem very supportive and open, or if you haven't yet learned how to sort of interpret who they are and their personality and you're unsure, then it's less easy to be that confident to offer that. But I think, my the positive spin on this, for me, is that you have resilience, and you are multilingual because you speak your native language maybe more, and you are learning English or can speak English, etc. And you're adaptable, and those are strengths. That type of lived experience is really strong, and I would encourage you strongly to think of yourselves as enriching workplaces, because that's where diversity thrives, bringing different experiences, bringing different perspectives. And I think diversity of thought for me is the best, because actually it goes past any other element of gender, of race, etc. It's just someone thinks differently, and how much more creative and innovative you can be if you have a diverse group of people. Sarah, yes, sorry.
There's another question here, which I think might not be to do with the UK work culture. It might be more to do with the person. But it says, when I asked how many times the English say sorry per day, one man answered dozens. The next question was how often they were sincere and honest when they said sorry. The answer was with a smile, never. Is that true? So that's one question. The next person says, is it true that people in the UK tend not to come across as super organized, as it means lack of talent? And then thirdly, some of my colleagues say never explain, never apologize. And I'd say younger generation who are native here never apologize. Well, I must say this isn't my experience, but I can imagine there are individual people like this at work that we all have to manage. What do you think, Cecilia?
I agree with you. I don't think that's the case. I mean, I had colleagues when I worked in a company, and certainly now as a consultant, I meet lots of young people, and I don't think that they have a reluctance to apologize. I think it is, as you say, Sarah, down to individuals. But to pick up the first question about saying sorry, English people do say sorry a lot. Yes, but I would attribute it. I wouldn't say that it's most of the time insincere. I wouldn't agree with that. But what I would say is very often it's a substitute when people feel a little bit uncomfortable or nervous. Sometimes people can say something and then there's a comment and someone says, "Oh, yeah, sorry, sorry," or "Sorry, can I come part?" It's sometimes it comes from a place of discomfort. But I wouldn't agree with the fact that it's never sincere. I think most of the time it is, and I think it's I'm trying to think of what um, the equivalent is in Italian. I mean, sometimes it might be permesso, sometimes it might be, um, you know, scusi. But we also do use it a lot in Italy, I think, I think it's also a way of showing that you are well-meaning. Put it that way. But I think the examples that you've given are really interesting, especially those questions around sort of sorry and sort of younger generations. I would say that it is very much down to the individual, and I think I've certainly encountered people who are of an older generation who also don't say sorry. So I think it really depends, and it depends what the context is. I think maybe one of the things that I should have mentioned right at the start is context is really important, and in the workplace, the industry, the team, the context is really important. And actually, what Sarah picked up on earlier is the industry. If you're working in finance or law, there's a very different culture and environment. If you're working in the media and in fashion, there's a different culture. And if you're working in engineering and construction, there is a very different culture. And I think culture is often determined also by the um, the DNA of the company and the composition of the company. So industries that are very heavily female or very heavily male will again be shaped. The culture of the organization will be very shaped by the gender or by a dominant group, whichever that may be. So there's so many elements to consider. It's very sort of layered and multi, lots of plates at a time, I think, spinning. But I want to sort of, I've picked up some, picked some phrases here that you might have encountered, or that are particularly troublesome, maybe for some of you, in terms of the way English people express themselves and what that might look like in the workplace context. But indirect feedback. So again, British people, I think, like to, as some of you have picked up, about the sort of your boss back at home would be very direct with feedback, whereas here maybe people are less direct feedback and wouldn't even tell you if you were wrong, and that might be the sort of the perception. But may we look at this again? That's again, it's a very typical, I think, English sentence, but you can interpret it in different ways. So you could interpret it thinking the person doesn't like it at all. You could interpret it as, they need more time, or you could interpret it as I really don't like it, or sort of, can you try again? It needs editing. So I think lots of the things here, and I think in a job interview, if someone says, "Tell me about a challenge that you've overcome," in your home country, maybe you would respond in a particular way. And here there's an expectation of giving a workplace example, maybe. In some cultures, actually, there's more of a tendency to give a personal example, about a challenge, because it's not necessarily who you are. You are a person, and you are that same person inside and outside of work, and your experience can be brought from the workplace or outside. Um, and then when you ask for clarity, I think the example Sarah sort of gave, but I think ties into this a little bit. And so if you're unsure what something means, I genuinely would say the best advice is ask the question. Ask for clarity just to confirm, or would you like this done in a particular way? Just request the clarification, because not, as I say, the English language can often not be as straightforward as your home country's language, and asking for clarification is absolutely fine. I think more often than not, people prefer someone to ask a clarification rather than to go down a particular path, make a mistake, and then have to rectify the mistake, or try to turn back. But I'll think about it. I'll think about it, for me, is one of the trickiest ones to interpret. And when I did some work with a French company, they just couldn't get their head around the multiple ways that I'll think about it could be interpreted, because for them, I'll think about it was a polite way of saying no. and the majority of people in the room, there was about 50 people, the majority said, well, that's just English people being polite, and really what they mean is no. But again, in this situation, you could think, maybe someone actually needs more time. So they do need time to think about it. So it might be that they have a particular time constraint, or their diary is very full, or they can't get to it in time. And so that's the choice of words that they use. But I think as well, it could be, and please do let me know what your thoughts are. But I think sometimes it might be that someone is interested but unsure, and they would like you to sort of maybe reassure them. So I'll think about it. They might actually think, ah, is it okay? Is it not okay? Is it good? Is it not good? Will this work? Will this not work? And what they need you to do is say, well, da, 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 or because, or have you considered, I've proposed this, suggested this, or this is the right product because, and help them make the decision. So they might genuinely not know, and they might want to be reassured. So I think I can totally appreciate how challenging sometimes even just a sentence that you receive might be. And again, I go back to that sort of fatigue element of thinking, oh, I've got to now interpret this. What does this mean? And do I have to formulate my answer also in that same style of rather than be direct. And I think it takes a toll. But what is really important for me is the clarity. If you're unsure of something, ask for clarification, and there's no harm. And I think any workplace that isn't appreciative of someone asking for clarification is not particularly welcoming one, and that wants to help you grow in your role. Asking for a clarification doesn't mean that you're silly, doesn't mean that you're incompetent. It just means that you haven't quite understood, and you'd rather understand it and get it right than get it wrong. So I think actually it's a smart question. It's a good way forward. So some strategies. So I said initially that culture is really dynamic. So, but you have that power to influence it too, because you bring your assets, your background, your experience. And I think in the UK, there is a sort of calm and maybe neutral way sometimes to sort of make sure that differences are respected. And in general, we avoid conflict because that's considered, the professional way of avoiding, full-blown conflict. I could not tell you that that's the same case in Italy, because I've been in offices or working with Italian bosses, and confrontation is absolutely acceptable. But again, it's a norm. It's a cultural way of being, which is very particular to a country. But I think a typical example of this would be, in the UK, customers sometimes wouldn't even complain directly. Maybe they don't complain directly. They might say, oh, they wouldn't say, I'm unhappy or I don't like this. They might say, oh, it's fine, don't worry, and sort of not overtly state that they're uncomfortable. And I think if you're from a culture where you're very used to reading tone, pauses, or body language, actually you have a very strong skill. And if already you've identified that your way of communicating in your culture is very different from the UK, that's an asset. In customer services, that could be super useful, or dealing with the public or a customer or a client. That's really useful because you've understood already that difference, but it's an important one. And I think, there are so many ways of navigating this, and I just put a few down here, and you might already have others to add. But I think try and decode that indirect communication. And having used that example earlier, that it takes its toll, is quite, it takes a lot of effort. But I think it's really important to try and ascertain before you give an answer or before you say something, what do we think we really mean? And I think communication very often is more than just words. body language is an incredibly strong form of communication. So I would say to you, take the time to try and decode tone, body language. Yeah, the context, as I said earlier, is really important. And yes, I mentioned earlier, ask questions, clarify, just to confirm, and that's totally fine here in the UK. Or can I just check that this is what you meant? I really would encourage you, and obviously you are already part of this group, and Kateba has obviously formed a really good supportive network. But I would encourage you strongly to go to community groups, find allies, learn from each other and each other's experiences, and peer learning is invaluable. So you all are here in the UK, you've all probably got different roles, you all navigate different workplaces, different industries. Share those with each other, share your experiences, because everything helps you build that sort of backpack of knowledge and experience that will help you navigate. And someone else's experience might really come in handy, for yourself as well. And I would say to you, because I feel so strongly about identity, you can adjust your behaviors, but don't lose who you are. It's really important that your identity still shines because that's what you bring. So I think when people sometimes feel that they're in another country, they think, oh, we have to adapt, we have to become like them. And that's not the case. I think we need to be mindful and respectful of them and them of us. But it's very important that you still retain who you are because that is what you bring. That is your uniqueness. And that is what is enriching in another culture, is that somebody from a different culture shares their experience. And it's not about just all becoming the same. And I say that from, I was adopted when I was 2 months old. In a white family, my father was Italian, my mother is English, and I have Sri Lankan background. So, and I genuinely try and keep all of those identities alive. It's not about being the same as others, but it's about being respectful to other people and to demand that same respect, but to really genuinely bring who you are, because that's the whole point of diversity, isn't that we just, all get clumped together. It's that everyone learns how to coexist and to communicate better. And you have strengths. You speak two or more languages for sure. So you speak your native language in English, that's for starters, and you might speak more. And you have that cross-cultural element already. You already have navigated your home country, maybe others, if you've been to other countries before coming to the UK, and in the UK. And those again are strengths, and they're perfect in roles that are to do with teamwork, to do with customer services, and actually to do with leadership. You can be a great leader if you have a good understanding of others. And I would really encourage you to self-promote and push for more if you feel that you can deliver more and you are deserving of more. There's nothing wrong with putting yourself forward for something and saying, I believe I can do this. And yeah, and accept the challenge. Look at it as a challenge. You don't have to do all of these at once, but maybe some sort of practical strategies for you is sort of self-awareness. And again, I come back to your identity. So really think about what your strengths are and the cultural differences between your home country and here, and think, how can I use those best? How can I help others understand how I operate or how my country has operated and how I add value? Keep learning. I genuinely think this. My Italian grandmother used to always say to me, the only day that you should stop learning is the day you go to your grave. And that is my mantra. Really always learn, always be curious, always want to help others to learn and to grow personally and professionally. And this is one of my favorite ones because I think in this world currently that we live in, which is super fast paced and digitized and AI and everything, we have forgotten how to really listen. And I think we need to encourage others to also listen about what you bring, your experiences, your skills. But really, if you've asked a question genuinely listen. And maybe the example that one of you gave earlier about, in my country, if we ask a question, how are you, or how are things, people genuinely tell you, do so. It doesn't matter that here people would say, oh, yeah, I'm fine, and not share. Do so, because actually that's real. That's the real you. And if you've had a challenge, or you've had I don't know, the bus broke down while you were coming to work, and then you were walking and some car splashed you with, that's fine. That's life. And I think we live in a world where we expect constants, everything so fast paced and perfection, and nobody is perfect, and the world isn't by any means perfect. So I think bring you, bring you, and help others understand you, and your cultures and your experiences, and look for different perspectives. I touched on this before. And if you can find someone who can mentor you, I think it's really important to find someone who can help you navigate, who you can use, I say, sort of bounce ideas off and think, hey, I was thinking about this, or this happened today. What do you think? Use people, find people that you think, oh, I do know. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a sort of English person. Use a mentor, maybe even but just help each other. I think community is such a strong thing, and Sarah is on the same wavelength for sure, and so is Kateva. But community is so important, and we have so many experiences that are invaluable, and if any of those, even without us knowing, can help someone and guide someone, and what we share can be helpful and useful, I think is really important. But try, if you can, to get maybe support or insight from people who understand cultural transitions. Actually, that's why I said it could be, again, between yourselves. Find someone who you think, hey, you've also done this, but what do you think? How have you found this? What challenges do you experience? Because they won't be identical for sure, because you are different individuals. And I think practice, build your confidence if you go to events, or even in a session like this. I'm not going to force you to raise your hand or speak up if you don't feel comfortable, but try and build your confidence in safe spaces. This is a safe space. This is a great community, and I'm sure that Kateba has always made everyone feel very welcome. So use these spaces to share and build your confidence through these type of events, or if you go to other in-person things. Brighton Chamber do great networking events, and one of the sessions that one of the Brighton Chamber team, Amy, ran was around networking. So learn, be comfortable with talking to other people about who you are, what you do, because there is absolutely no right and wrong answer ever. It's just about difference. And I'll leave you with this before I open it to questions, but when I think of difference, I always say to people, it's and, not or. So it's not UK or Ukraine or Italy or, Afghanistan. It's and. It's always about everyone. And we always benefit from, not homogeneity and everyone being the same and everyone thinking the same and everyone dressing the same. But if you talk to my 17-year-old daughter, it is about dressing the same, but that's another story. But thank you so much for your comments that you've put in the chat, and for listening to me. I hope this has been useful, but I'll stop sharing my slides if that's okay now, and absolutely delighted if you feel that you have any questions or comments for me.